Before we begin, what you are about to hear is a true story. The details are real, the losses are real, and every name you are about to hear belonged to a human being who mattered. Somewhere on American Interstate right now, a truck is moving. 40 tons of steel, a legal load, a licensed driver with every document in order. The kind of rig you've passed 100 times without a second thought, without a reason to look twice, without any instinct that something could be wrong. In 1990, an Arizona state trooper pulled a truck over on a quiet stretch of highway. It was supposed to be a routine stop, just another check on, just another truck. But what he found inside that cab had been 15 years in the making. A hidden compartment the driver had built himself. Chains, restraints, equipment that had no business existing inside any vehicle on any road. And inside the cab sits a woman, naked, handcuffed and screaming. She was alive and the trooper got her out, so she went home that night. But before her, there were people who never heard that knock on the door, who never felt the cuffs come off, who never had someone on the other side of that door. 3 of them were known: Regina, Ricky, Candace. They are not just evidence or exhibits. They are people who got into that truck on an ordinary day on an ordinary road and never came back out the way they went in. Before we go any further, wherever you are in the world tonight, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. It means more than you know to understand that people from all over are sitting with these stories, making sure these names don't get forgotten. Pasadena, Texas, a suburb southeast of Houston where the refineries sit on the horizon and the streets look like every other street in every other working-class neighborhood in America. That's where Regina K. Walters grew up. Born May 5th, 1975, those who knew her described a girl who was bright, curious, and restless. The kind of restless that belongs to people who feel the walls of their circumstances more sharply than others around them. 2 older siblings, a mother whose apartment in Pasadena was home, a life that was, by all accounts, ordinary in the way most lives are ordinary, imperfect, complicated, and entirely hers. She liked to babysit for a family in the neighborhood, reliable enough that they gave her a key. 14 years old, trusted with a key, trusted with someone else's children. A girl building a reputation, a girl people counted on. What does it mean that we remember so little about who she was counting on? The night of February 3rd, 1990, Regina didn't come home. Her mother noticed because Regina always came home, or called. That was the pattern, the understood agreement between them. When the key wasn't returned, when the call didn't come, her mother filed a missing persons report. She hadn't vanished. She had left. The distinction mattered enormously to how the world responded, and it shouldn't have. The night before, on Saturday, March 2nd, Regina had met a young man named Ricky Lee Jones at a local hangout near her mother's apartment complex. An immediate liking, a promise to meet again the following evening. The following evening came. Ricky came back, and somewhere in the space between those 2 nights, a plan formed. The kind of plan that forms when you're 14 and in love, and the world feels both too small and too dangerous to stay in. They were going to hitchhike to Mexico. Ricky had relatives there. A new start, somewhere no one could complicate things. On the night of March 3rd, 1990, Regina K. Walters walked out of her mother's apartment in a London fog coat. Ricky was beside her. Everything she thought she needed was with her. That coat turned up later, not on her, in someone else's possession. That detail would take investigators years to fully understand. She was 14 years old. She had a laugh people still remember. She had a key she forgot to return. How many 14-year-olds have walked out a door towards something they thought was freedom and been failed by every system that should have caught them before anything bad could happen? Indianapolis, Indiana. That's where he started. His parents divorced in 1977. Growing up, he and his siblings had been removed from their home by Child Protective Services, a boys' shelter for some of those years. Eventually, Texas, Jacinto City, by 1990. A few brushes with the law along the way. The kind that follow young men who grow up without stable ground under them. Probation for auto theft when he met Regina. None of that is who he was. It is only what happened to him. His friends described him as meek, quiet, the kind of person who moved through the world without wanting to take up too much space in it. He hadn't known Regina, was only 14 when they met. When he found out, according to people who knew him, it didn't change how he felt. Completely in love with her. The decision to run wasn't his alone. Regina insisted on going with him. She wouldn't let him leave without her. Think about that for a moment. An 18-year-old carrying more than most people his age, and a 14-year-old girl who saw something in him worth following across state lines. Whatever their circumstances, whatever the complications, they had found each other. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, everything. Why does every account of this case reduce Ricky Lee Jones to a footnote? His body wasn't found for over a year. On March 3rd, 1991, exactly 1 year to the day after he and Regina left Pasadena together, Ricky's remains turned up in a deep ditch approximately 20 feet from Highway 59 in Lamar County, Mississippi. Shot in the head, left without identification, without anything to connect him to the person who had refused to leave him behind. Logged as a John Doe. For 17 years, Ricky Lee Jones existed in a database as a John Doe, not a victim, not a person with a name and a history and a girl who had chosen him. In 2008, DNA taken from his remains matched to his mother. The Doe Network announced his identification that July. 18 years after he died, someone said his name out loud officially. The same system that failed Regina also failed Ricky. More quietly, more completely, and with far less documentation. No trial, no formal charge, no courtroom where his name appeared on any indictment. Robert Ben Rhodes was never prosecuted for what happened to Ricky Lee Jones, because by the time his remains carried a name, the evidence needed to build a case had long since been swallowed by time in a ditch on a Mississippi highway. Ricky Jones grew up without stable ground. He found Regina and decided that was enough of a reason to try for something better. He never made it past that truck. What does it say about the way we tell these stories that his name still doesn't ring a bell the way hers does? Seattle, Washington, November 1989. Patricia Candace Walsh, Candy, to the people who loved her, had married Douglas Scott Zykzowski and was 23 years old. Outgoing and free-spirited, her brother would later say. A dedicated believer who shared her faith with anyone who would listen, not as a performance, but because it was simply who she was. Members of the Everyday Church, an evangelical congregation in Seattle that no longer exists, Candy and Douglas made a decision in November 1989 that was entirely consistent with who they both were. They were going to hitchhike from Seattle to Georgia to attend a religious convention. No car, no identification, just faith that the road would provide, that the people they encountered would be the people they were meant to meet. Her brother didn't even know the plan until she called him from Georgia in December 1989. His sister's voice, excited, alive, calling from across the country to say they had made it. The faith had held, the road had been kind. That was the last time he heard her voice. The journey back to Seattle began. Somewhere near El Paso, Texas, heading home, they accepted a ride. Douglas Scott Zykzowski was 26 years old. Born November 19, 1963, he had graduated from John F. Kennedy Memorial High School in Burien, Washington. His parents loved him enough that when he went missing, they got in their car and drove the country looking for him, following highways, chasing leads, refusing to accept that silence meant the same thing as gone. His body turned up January 21st, 1990, on the side of Interstate 10 West in Sutton County, Texas, approximately 30 miles east of Ozona, midway between San Antonio and El Paso. Beaten, shot 3 times in the head. A passing trucker later came forward to say he had seen a man matching Rhodes' description assaulting a man matching Douglas's description behind a van near that stretch of road. A girl in hippie-style clothing stood nearby. That trucker saw something, kept driving. Douglas's body came into the system in January, not identified until May 1992, because someone had entered the information on his missing persons report incorrectly into a computer. An error, a clerical error that handed his family 2 additional years of not knowing. Candy's remains turned up October 26, 1990, found by deer hunters. An isolated, mountainous area near Interstate 15 in Millard County, Utah. Shot 4 times in the head and neck. Her braided hair draped over her shoulder. No clothing, no jewelry, nothing belonging to her remained at the scene. For 13 years, she was Jane Doe, not Candy Walsh, not the free-spirited woman her brother loved, not the believer who hitchhiked across the country on faith and called home from Georgia to say she'd made it. Jane Doe, a set of remains in a file. In May 2003, forensic scientists from the University of Arizona identified her through dental records and DNA testing. Her remains went back to King County, Washington, to be buried alongside her husband. Together, finally, in the ground they should never have been put in. She left Seattle with nothing but faith. She called her brother from Georgia to say the road had been kind. How do you tell a family that the road they trusted with someone they loved was being hunted at the same time? By the time anyone began to understand what moved through the American highway system, 3 people from 2 separate incidents were already dead. Ricky Jones in a ditch in Mississippi. Douglas Zykzowski on the shoulder of Interstate 10 in Texas. Candy Walsh on a ridge in Utah. Unnamed, unfiled, waiting for deer hunters to find her in autumn. Regina K. Walters was still alive. For weeks after March 3, 1990, Regina had vanished into the category the system kept for certain kinds of missing. Teenage runaway, left by choice, low urgency. Her mother had filed the report. The machinery had noted it. The machinery had not moved. Somewhere on the American interstate, a truck kept driving. 2 phone calls came through to Regina's father. The number was unlisted, the kind of number a stranger should not have been able to access. The first call traced back to Oklahoma City. The second to Ennis, Texas. Both times the same voice. Calm, deliberate. The caller said he had cut Regina's hair. Said she was in a barn loft. Regina's father asked if she was alive. The line went dead. A father, a phone in his hand, a dead line. His daughter's name hanging in the air between a call that told him she existed somewhere and a silence that told him nothing else. No address, no barn, no way to know if the next call would come. He had a system that had classified his child as a runaway, and a voice on a payphone that knew things about her that no stranger should have known. Her body came to light on September 29, 1990, when a farmer walked through an abandoned property in Bond County, Illinois, intending to have it burned down before he discovered what was inside. Dental records confirmed her identity. The London fog coat she had been wearing the night she left her mother's apartment turned up later, not at the scene, in someone else's possession, somewhere that took investigators years to reach. At the same time, in a Utah file, in a Mississippi ditch, in a Texas database with a data entry error sitting uncorrected, 3 other people connected to the same truck still waited to be found, named, and counted. Their families kept making calls, filing reports, demanding answers from systems separated by state lines and jurisdictions and databases that didn't speak to each other. Each family working from their own isolated corner of something that was not designed to connect the dots they were all, separately, trying to connect. September 29, 1990. A farmer finds a body in a barn in Bond County, Illinois. Dental records identify her as Regina K. Walters, 14 years old, missing since March, classified as a runaway. Local authorities in Bond County looked at the evidence and drew the nearest available conclusion. The boyfriend had done it. Ricky Lee Jones, 18, a few run-ins with the law, already absent and unaccounted for, fit the profile they needed to close the question quickly. The FBI disagreed. Brought in to review what had been found in that barn, Special Agent Mark Young worked through the forensic evidence methodically. The nature of the crime, the profile it required. His assessment was direct. The killer was an older man, a traveler, someone with well-developed and specific sexual interests. That profile didn't match an 18-year-old boy from Jacinto City with minor prior offenses. It matched something else entirely, something that required more resources, more coordination, and more willingness to look beyond the nearest available explanation than Bond County had initially offered. Young's assessment was right. The system that should have acted on it moved slowly. Meanwhile, in Millard County, Utah, Candy Walsh remained Jane Doe. In Sutton County, Texas, Douglas Zykzowski's remains sat unidentified, the computer error ensuring that even when his file existed in the system, the family looking for him couldn't reach it. In a Mississippi ditch, Ricky Jones lay where he'd been left, unknown, unclaimed, unconnected to any of it. For people, for jurisdictions, zero coordination. The families kept calling. Candy's brother in Seattle, Ricky's mother, the Zykzowski parents who had driven the country looking for their son and come home to an empty chair and a phone that didn't ring. Each of them working from their own isolated corner of a system not designed to connect the dots. They were all, separately, trying to connect. That is what systemic failure looks like when you strip away the official language. Not a single dramatic moment of negligence. For families, for states, the same calls to the same kinds of offices, the same measured non-answers. Houses where someone's shoes were still by the door and nobody in any government building was treating that as an emergency. What would it have taken for someone to pull those 4 cases into the same room? The answer arrived not in a conference room, not in a federal database, not through any of the mechanisms that should have existed and didn't. It arrived on a desert highway in Arizona. April 1st, 1990. A state trooper named Mike Miller noticed a truck parked on the shoulder with its hazard lights on. No apparent emergency. Routine check. The kind of stop that happens 1,000 times a day on American highways and produces nothing. He approached the cab. He knocked. From inside, a woman's voice, screaming. His name was Robert Ben Rhodes. Born November 22nd, 1945, in Council Bluffs, Iowa. Eventually a long-haul trucker. Interstate routes across the United States. Legitimate employment. Legitimate documentation. Legitimate reason to be on every road in every state at every hour. The truck was a 1985 International cab over. Between the front seats, accessible from a cab, he had converted a section of a sleeper compartment into a hidden space. Handcuffs on the ceiling. Restraints built and placed deliberately, over time, with intent. From the outside, the truck looked like every other rig on the road. How do you build a system that allows a vehicle to cross 48 states for 15 years with a torture chamber hidden inside it, and never once look? The answer is not complicated. His victims were predominantly hitchhikers, runaways, people traveling without fixed itineraries and without the social networks that generate immediate, urgent, well-resourced responses when they disappear. People the system had already decided were less worth looking for. The highway didn't hide him. The highway's indifference to certain kinds of people did. He told a captive woman on April 1st, 1990 that he had been doing this since 1975. 15 years. Across the full geography of the American interstate system. Through way stations. Past highway patrol. Alongside millions of ordinary travelers who had no reason to look twice. FBI analysts later took his trucking logs, the ones that could be recovered, and cross-referenced the locations, dates, and times against reported disappearances and bodies found along his routes. What emerged wasn't a theory. It was a map. People went missing in the places where he drove. Bodies appeared in the places where he had been. The correlation held across years, across state lines, across the full geography of the American interstate system. The number the FBI arrived at exceeded 50. 50 separate lives that were traveling somewhere. 50 people who accepted a ride, or broke down on a highway, or made one decision on one ordinary day that put them in proximity to a truck that looked exactly like every other truck on the road. 50 families who filed reports, or didn't, or couldn't, or were told their person had probably just moved on. 3 of those 50 had names spoken in a courtroom. The highway kept the rest. Trooper Miller approached a truck with its hazard lights on at the side of an Arizona highway. He heard a woman screaming from inside. Naked, handcuffed, wearing a horse bridle. Rhodes tried to explain it as a private matter. Miller arrested him. In the search that followed, of the truck and later of Rhodes' apartment, photographs turned up. A 14-year-old girl, a woman whose remains were decomposing in Utah. The 15 years ended on a highway in Arizona on April Fool's Day, 1990. But the case that ended that day was only the beginning of what the families of Regina, Ricky, Candace, and Douglas were about to have to endure. April 1st, 1990. Rhodes in handcuffs. A woman rescued from inside the truck. The immediate charges, aggravated assault, sexual assault, unlawful imprisonment, were Arizona charges handled by Arizona authorities in Arizona courts. The photographs in his apartment came later, during the search that followed. A teenage girl, a woman on film, 2 images that connected a man in Arizona custody to bodies in Illinois and Utah, in a ditch in Mississippi, but only if the right people from the right jurisdictions were in the same room at the same time, looking at the same evidence. Detective Rick Barnhart made the connection, the arresting detective who followed the case beyond the immediate Arizona charges, who noticed the Houston connection, who looked at the pattern. His work is the reason the photographs in the apartment linked to Regina K. Walters. His work is the reason the case moved at all, but it moved slowly. Jurisdictional transfer, extradition, the grinding machinery of a system not designed for crimes that crossed 8, 10, 12 state lines. Regina's body had been found in September 1990. Dental records confirmed her identity. The London fog coat, the coat she had been wearing the night she left her mother's apartment, turned up in Rhodes' possession. The evidence existed. The connection existed. The conviction came in 1994. For years. That is how long the machinery took to move from a coat in an apartment to a verdict in a courtroom. For years of Regina's family carrying what the dental records had already told them, waiting for the law to say out loud what the evidence had made undeniable. Life without parole. Illinois, 1994. While that case was building, Candy Walsh remained Jane Doe in a Utah file. Her family in Seattle knew she was gone. They just didn't know where or how, or whether the law would ever reach the man responsible. Douglas Zykzowski had come into the system with a name by 1992, 2 years after his body was found on an Interstate 10 shoulder, the identification delayed by a data entry error that no one had caught. His parents had driven the country looking for him. The country had mistyped his name into a database and lost him twice. Ricky Jones was still in a Mississippi ditch, still a John Doe, still waiting. Utah indicted Rhodes in 2005, 15 years after Candy's remains turned up on that ridge, 13 years after her name came back through dental records and DNA. Capital murder charges. The case moved toward a courtroom. Then the families asked for it to stop. They didn't want to testify twice. 2 states, 2 proceedings, 2 separate courtrooms where they would have to sit in the front row and relive the same loss in front of the same man who had caused it. The charges dropped in 2006. Rhodes went back to Illinois. Texas took him next. In 2012, 22 years after Douglas Zykzowski's body turned up on a Texas highway, and 11 years after Candy's name finally came back from a forensic lab, Robert Ben Rhodes stood in a Texas courtroom and pleaded guilty to both of their murders. 2 more life sentences, 22 years after the highway took them. The families finally got a verdict. They had asked, in the process of getting it, not to be made to testify twice. That request, the specific exhaustion embedded in it, the particular cruelty of a system that would have required them to relive the same thing in 2 different states, is its own kind of documented failure. Justice arrived. The cost of getting there was paid entirely by the people who had already lost the most. Ricky Lee Jones was never part of any of those proceedings. Rhodes confessed to killing him. Confessions, without corroborating evidence sufficient to support a charge, are not enough. The law has rules. The rules protected Rhodes from accountability for Ricky's death more completely than they ever protected Ricky on that highway. His family got his name back in 2008. They never got a courtroom. What does it mean to be the victim the law couldn't reach? Life without parole. 3 times. Robert Ben Rhodes sits today in the maximum security Menard Correctional Center in Chester, Illinois. Since 1994, he will die there. The law reached him. The law held for 3 victims. Steve Smith, first assistant for the 112th District Attorney's Office in Texas, stood in the courtroom when Rhodes entered his 2012 guilty plea for the murders of Candace Walsh and Douglas Zykzowski. A prosecutor since 1979, Smith told ABC News that walking into that room was one of the rare moments in his career where he felt something he struggled to name. The hairs on his arm stood up. Candy Walsh's brother had described her as a free-spirited believer who would share her faith with anyone who would listen. Douglas's parents had driven the country looking for him. In a Texas courtroom in 2012, the guilty plea arrived, 22 years after Candy called her brother from Georgia and said the road had been kind. In 2006, the families of Candace Walsh and Douglas Zykzowski asked Utah to drop the charges against the man who had killed them. They cannot face 2 courtrooms. They had already paid everything the grief required. They cannot be asked to pay it twice, in 2 different states, in front of the same man. The charges dropped. Rhodes went back to Illinois. Not a failure of the law. A cost borne entirely by the people who had already lost the most. Because 3 life sentences don't address the FBI's analysis of Rhodes' trucking logs. A pattern of disappearances and bodies suggesting a victim count exceeding 50 people. 50. Most of them women. Most of them hitchhikers, travelers, people moving through the American highway system without the documentation and social infrastructure that generates urgent responses when they vanish. For those families, the ones who never got a detective connecting dots, never got a photograph found in an apartment, never got a courtroom, the guilty pleas in Illinois and Texas were news stories. Not verdicts, not answers. How many families sat with a newspaper in 2012, reading about a guilty plea, and understood it to be about someone they loved, without anyone in the legal system ever telling them directly? The highway holds its silence. The trucking logs suggest names that were never spoken in any courtroom. The suspected 50 remain suspected, unconfirmed, unresolved, their families carrying the specific weight of a loss that the legal system has never officially acknowledged. 3 names got verdicts. The highway kept the rest. For families. For jurisdictions. 1 man driving across 48 states for 15 years. Someone entered Douglas Zykzowski's missing persons report incorrectly into a computer. 2 additional years of his parents not knowing their son had been found. For separate state investigations ran in parallel with no mechanism to connect them. Victims profiled in ways that reduced the urgency of the search before the search had properly begun. A highway system that moved hundreds of thousands of trucks without any standardized framework for flagging the movement patterns of suspected predators. Ricky Jones is the sharpest edge of all of it. He grew up in the child welfare system. Minor record. Traveling without documentation in the company of a 14-year-old girl. Every structural factor that shapes how the system responds to a missing person worked against him from the moment he disappeared. The Mississippi ditch held him for a year. The John Doe file held him for 17 more. No law has been named after Ricky Lee Jones. The National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime at FBI headquarters in Quantico eventually analyzed Rhodes' trucking logs and documented the correlation between his routes and a pattern of disappearances. That analysis came after his arrest, after the bodies, after the families had already spent years in waiting rooms and on phone calls and in front of computers searching databases that weren't designed to give them back what they had lost. The analysis confirmed what the families already knew. Something had been moving through the system for 15 years. The system had not been built to see it coming. What would it have taken to build it differently? Not in hindsight, but in 1979, in 1983, in 1987, when the pattern was already being written into the landscape of the American highway. The everyday church in Seattle, where Candy Walsh and Douglas Zykzowski worshipped, is permanently closed. The Pasadena neighborhood where Regina grew up has changed. The barn in Bond County, Illinois, where a farmer found a 14-year-old girl's body, still stands on a property that most people driving past on Interstate 70 will never think about twice. The highway is still moving. Trucks still wave through way stations without anyone checking what's inside. The databases are better now, more connected, more capable of pattern recognition across jurisdictions. Better is not the same as fixed, and fixed would not undo what was lost. It would not give Ricky Jones back his name any sooner. It would not bring Candy Walsh's voice back to her brother's phone. It would not return a London fog coat to the girl who wore it out the door on the night of March 3, 1990. Douglas Scott Zykzowski, born November 19, 1963, 26 years old. His parents got in their car and drove the country searching for him before they knew he was gone. Patricia Candace Walsh, born December 18, 1966, 23 years old. She called her brother from Georgia and said the faith had held. Free-spirited, a believer who shared what she loved with anyone who would listen. Her braided hair draped over her shoulder when deer hunters found her on a ridge in Utah. And for 13 years she was still Jane Doe. And in 2003 a forensic lab gave her name back and sent her home to Seattle to be buried beside her husband. Together, as they had been on that highway. Ricky Lee Jones, born in Indianapolis, Indiana, 18 years old, meek, according to his friends, completely in love with a girl he had known for less than 2 days. She insisted on going. He ended up in a ditch on a Mississippi highway, unknown and unclaimed. And for 17 years, the only thing standing between him and permanent anonymity was a database, a DNA sample, and a researcher at the Doe Network who refused to let the file close. His name came back in July 2008. Regina K. Walters, born May 5, 1975, in Harris County, Texas, 14 years old, bright, intelligent, adventurous, the words people who knew her still use. She babysat for a family in her neighborhood. They gave her a key. She forgot to return it the night she left. A London fog coat, found in a killer's apartment, connected her to a truck she had trusted and a road she thought was taking her somewhere better. Her dental records identified her. Her name entered an Illinois courtroom in 1994. Life without parole for the man who took her. It was not enough. It was what the law could give, and it was not enough. These four people, Regina, Ricky, Candace, Douglas, represent the confirmed, documented edge of something much larger that the American highway system has never fully accounted for. The FBI's analysis suggests 50 or more victims, 50 or more families who may have never received a phone call, a verdict, a courtroom moment where someone read a name aloud and the law said, "This person mattered. This loss was real. We see it." The highway never gave back everyone it took. But tonight, 3 of them have their names back. Regina, Ricky, Candace. Say them out loud. Someone should. If these stories moved you, if you believe the people behind the headlines deserve to be remembered as the human beings they were, subscribe to Shadow Verdict. Every week we go deep into the cases the world forgot, for the people who deserve better. Turn on notifications. And remember, the forgotten deserve to be remembered.